Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a grand empire or a brutal battlefield, but to a world that, for most of human history, was profoundly, almost disturbingly, quiet. We're going to explore what life was like before the pervasive hum of electricity, before engines roared and screens buzzed. Imagine waking up in a world where the loudest sounds were natural, where your ears were tuned to subtle whispers, and where true silence was a frequent companion. You might not even realize how much background noise you live with every single day. And frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a single night in that old, quiet world without feeling a deep, existential dread. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken, not to the blare of an alarm, or the distant rumble of traffic, or the faint hum of a refrigerator. Instead, your senses are greeted by a silence so profound it almost feels like a presence. You're lying on a straw-filled mattress in a small, timber-framed cottage, perhaps in rural England in the 17th century, or maybe a simple farmstead in colonial America. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the faint silver glow of the moon filtering through a tiny, unglazed window, or the flicker of dying embers in the hearth. This isn't just quiet. This is the dominant silence, a fundamental characteristic of a world untouched by the electrical age. Your ears, unaccustomed to the constant barrage of modern noise, are acutely tuned to the subtle sounds of your immediate environment. You hear the gentle, rhythmic breathing of your family sleeping nearby, the rustle of mice in the thatched roof above. A sound that today might go unnoticed is distinct. Perhaps the soft creak of the house timbers settling, or the distant, almost imperceptible drip of water from a leaky roof. These aren't intrusive noises. They are the natural symphony of a living, breathing dwelling, amplified by the utter lack of any artificial sounds. As you slowly stir, you become aware of the sounds from outside. The first faint chirps of awakening birds, tentative at first, then growing into a chorus. The distant lowing of cattle from a nearby barn, or the impatient bleating of a sheep. The whisper of the wind through the tall grass, or the rustle of leaves in the trees just beyond your door. These are the sounds that mark the passage of time, the natural alarm clock of a pre-industrial world. There's no mechanical whirring, no distant traffic drone, no sudden jarring noises. The soundscape is entirely organic. This absence of persistent, human-made noise means your auditory perception is far more refined than ours. You might be able to distinguish the footsteps of a specific family member approaching, or recognize the unique bark of a particular dog from miles away. Sounds travel further, unabsorbed by the cacophony of modern life. A shouted warning, a church bell, the distinct clang of a blacksmith's hammer. These sounds carry across fields and valleys with startling clarity, serving as vital signals in a world without electronic communication. One common historical fact we often forget is how truly dark the world was at night. Without streetlights or indoor bulbs, ambient light pollution was virtually non-existent. This profound darkness contributed to the quiet, as human activity largely ceased. What's less commonly discussed is how this lack of light also enhanced auditory perception. In absolute darkness, your other senses become heightened. The sounds you hear are sharper, more defined, and carry a greater weight of meaning, guiding you through an otherwise impenetrable world. This sensory reliance created a unique relationship with the environment. This undisturbed quiet meant that natural phenomena held far more auditory prominence. The approach of a thunderstorm wasn't just a visual event, it was an escalating symphony of distant rumbling. The increasing sigh of the wind, the sharp crack of thunder that reverberated through the very ground beneath your feet, the roar of a nearby river, the crash of ocean waves, the insistent patter of rain on the roof. These weren't background noises, they were powerful, immersive sounds that dictated your daily life and sometimes even your survival. Historians still debate whether the pre-industrial quiet led to a more acute sense of hearing and environmental awareness among people, or if our modern ears have simply become desensitized to a level of noise that would have been considered unbearable in earlier eras. It's a fascinating question about human adaptation and the impact of our sensory environment. Could we even cope with such pervasive quiet now, As you rise from your bed, the sounds you make are simple, organic. The gentle creak of the floorboards under your bare feet, the soft rustle of your wool tunic as you pull it on, the quiet hiss and crackle as you coax the embers back to life in the hearth, a tiny burst of sound in the vast silence. Even your movements are quieter, unhurried, lacking the frantic urgency of a modern, time-driven life. Every action, every gesture, is accompanied by only the most fundamental, unamplified sounds. This dominant silence isn't just an absence, it's a presence. It shapes your perceptions, influences your routines, and dictates the very pace of your existence. It's a world where every sound has meaning, where quiet moments are the norm, and where the few loud noises truly stand out, demanding your attention. It's a quiet that, to our modern ears, might feel profoundly unsettling, even lonely. But for those who lived within it, it was simply the sound of life itself. Having woken to the pervasive silence of a pre-electrical world, your day truly begins to unfold, not with the cacophony we know, but with a unique symphony of organic and human-powered noises. Your ears, still finely tuned by the quiet of the night, now discern the subtle sounds of the day, each one a distinct marker in the rhythm of life before widespread mechanization. Imagine stepping outside your cottage into the crisp morning air. The first noticeable sound is often the rustle of clothing, the coarse wool or linen of your tunic and trousers, the swish of a woman's skirt. There's no hum of modern fabrics. Every movement generates a soft, natural friction. Your wooden clogs or leather boots make a distinct clatter on the dirt path, a sound amplified in the stillness. Even walking itself becomes a sound event, your footsteps clearly audible as you move. As you approach the barn, the lowing of cattle and the bleating of sheep are rich, resonant sounds, carrying clearly across the fields. The excited cackle of chickens chasing after stray grains, the snorts and whickers of horses in their stalls. These are not distant background noises, but immediate, vibrant elements of your morning. You hear the rhythmic clink of a metal bucket against a wooden well as someone draws water, the splash as it fills, and the creak of the well rope. Every necessary action in daily life has its own unique, unamplified sound signature. In the fields, the sounds of agriculture dominate. The rhythmic swish and thwack of scythes cutting grain, the steady clop, clop, clop of horse hooves as a plow turns the earth, the soft rustle of dry stalks in the breeze. When the harvest is underway, you'd hear the collective chatter of workers, their voices carrying across the open land, perhaps punctuated by a shouted command or a burst of song. This is manual labor, and its sounds are human-powered, organic, and deeply connected to the earth. There are no tractors rumbling, no combine harvesters roaring, just the pure, unadulterated sounds of human and animal effort. Even the simplest household chores contribute to this auditory tapestry. Inside, you'd hear the clatter of pottery or wooden bowls as breakfast is prepared, the snap and hiss of firewood being added to the hearth, and the steady grind of a handmill as grain is turned into flour. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a mortar and pestle preparing herbs or spices. The soft clink of a needle against fabric as someone mends clothes. These are intimate, repetitive sounds that form the constant, comforting background hum of domestic life. One common historical fact is that personal space, as we understand it, was often very limited. Families lived in close quarters, sometimes with multiple generations under one roof. What's less commonly considered is how this intense proximity affected the soundscape. Every cough, every sigh, every whispered conversation was potentially audible. People learned to modulate their voices, to communicate non-verbally, and to be highly aware of the sounds they produced, as privacy was often an auditory luxury. This constant oral awareness likely shaped social interactions in subtle ways. For a moment, imagine the sound of a village blacksmith. The rhythmic clang, clang, clang of his hammer striking hot metal on the anvil would be a dominant sound, echoing through the small community. It's a powerful, resonant noise, signaling industry and skill, or perhaps the distant, repetitive thump of a fulling mill, where cloth was treated, a sound that might travel for miles on a quiet day, indicating a thriving local industry. These are the sounds of human ingenuity, powered by muscle or rudimentary water and wind power, not by invisible electrical currents. Another unique auditory experience of the pre-electric world was the way human voices carried, without constant background noise to compete with. Unamplified voices could travel astonishing distances. A shout across a field, a call from one house to another, these were effective forms of communication. This meant that the human voice itself was a more powerful tool, commanding attention in a way that is often lost in our noisy modern environments. You learned to project your voice, to listen intently, and to interpret the subtle nuances of tone that might be lost amidst mechanical distractions today. This skill was a vital part of everyday interaction, a silent agreement to listen in a world that allowed it. Historians still debate whether the constant exposure to natural and organic sounds in pre-industrial societies led to different cognitive processing of auditory information, or if modern humans simply filter out more ambient noise due to sensory overload. It's a fascinating question about how our environment shapes our brains and our perceptions. As the sun climbs higher, the sounds of human activity reach their peak. The distant creak of cartwheels on a dirt road, perhaps accompanied by the gentle jingle of harness bells as a horse-drawn wagon passes by. The chirping of crickets or cicadas, a consistent natural background hum during warmer months. The occasional bark of a dog or the meow of a barn cat. These are the sounds of life, lived at a different pace, unhurried, and deeply connected to the natural world. As the day begins to wane, the sounds slowly shift, signaling the approach of evening. The sounds of labor diminish, replaced by the crackling of evening fires, the quieter chatter of families gathering, and the first tentative calls of nocturnal birds. The dominant quiet of the morning slowly begins to reclaim its reign, preparing the world for the profound silence of the coming night. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, fading shadows across the fields, the world transforms. The natural sounds of the day begin to recede, and a deeper, more profound quiet descends. This is night's deep embrace, a silence so complete, so utterly devoid of artificial sound, that it would feel disturbing, almost alien, to our modern ears. Imagine the transition. The last calls of the roosters are replaced by the first chirps of crickets, their chorus growing louder as the light fades. The distant lowing of cattle settles into a quiet chewing, the animals preparing for slumber. The wind, if present, still whispers through the trees, a soft, natural lullaby. But the sounds of human activity, the clang of the blacksmith, the distant chatter of the market, the rhythmic thwack of the scythe, these all vanish inside your cottage. The darkness is profound. Without electric lights, even a single candle or a sputtering oil lamp casts only a small, flickering circle of illumination, leaving the rest of the room in deep shadow. These limited light sources contribute to the quiet. As intricate tasks requiring bright light cease, people move more slowly, more carefully, their senses heightened to navigate the gloom. The crackle of the hearth fire, where embers glow like tiny red eyes, becomes a prominent sound, its warmth and light drawing everyone closer together. Your ears, already finely tuned by the dominant quiet of the day, now become even more acute. You hear the soft, deliberate breathing of your family members, each inhale and exhale distinct in the stillness. The gentle shifting of straw on the mattress as someone turns over. The almost imperceptible creak of the floorboards as you move quietly to add a log to the fire. These are the intimate sounds of human presence, amplified by the surrounding void of artificial noise. Outside, the silence is even more remarkable. There are no streetlights humming, no distant traffic roaring on highways, no constant thrum of air conditioners or refrigerators. The only artificial sounds would be rare and specific, the occasional distant bark of a dog, the faint jingle of a horse's harness if someone is traveling late, or perhaps the mournful toll of a church bell marking the hour. These sounds, when they occur, stand out with startling clarity against the backdrop of natural quiet. This profound nighttime silence meant that the sounds of nature at night held immense significance. The hoot of an owl from the nearby woods, the rustle of a nocturnal animal foraging in the undergrowth, the splash of a fish in a nearby stream. These weren't just ambient noises, they were vital clues, indicators of the living world around you. They could signal danger, like the approach of a predator, or simply provide the comforting presence of life in the darkness. Your brain, unburdened by constant mechanical noise, would instinctively interpret these sounds, forming a detailed auditory map of your surroundings. One common historical fact is that people in pre-industrial societies generally went to bed much earlier and woke with the sun. What's less commonly discussed is the phenomenon of segmented sleep, also known as first sleep and second sleep. Without artificial light, people often went to sleep shortly after dusk, woke up in the middle of the night for an hour or two of quiet activity, reading by firelight, praying, conversing quietly with family members, or even visiting neighbors, and then returned to sleep until dawn. This nighttime quiet was a period for reflection and subtle interaction, a stark contrast to our unbroken blocks of sleep in a world filled with constant digital stimulation. This quiet, while perhaps unsettling to us, fostered a different kind of sensory awareness. Your sense of hearing would be incredibly sharp, able to pick up minute details. You might hear the distant cry of a fox across the valley, or the subtle shift in the wind's direction. This heightened auditory sensitivity was not just a curiosity, it was a survival mechanism, allowing you to detect threats or opportunities long before they became visible in the darkness. Historians still debate whether the pervasive quiet of pre-industrial nights led to a different quality of sleep or deeper dream experiences, or if modern noise pollution primarily impacts the perception of sleep quality rather than its physiological functions. It's a fascinating area of research that explores the long-term effects of our auditory environments on human well-being. As you lie in bed, unable to distract yourself with screens or amplified music, your mind becomes more active. The quiet encourages introspection, reflection, and perhaps storytelling. Family members might whisper tales, recite poems, or share news of the day in hushed tones, their voices creating small islands of sound in the vast ocean of silence. The lack of external stimulation pushes your attention inward, fostering a different kind of mental landscape. The deepest hours of the night would bring an almost absolute quiet, broken only by the natural world's most subtle sounds. The distant murmur of a river, the gentle breathing of the forest, the occasional, almost imperceptible rustle of an insect. This is the quiet that allowed people to feel truly connected to the natural world, to hear its rhythms, and to experience a profound sense of isolation that could be both comforting and, at times, profoundly disturbing. For those who lived it, this deep quiet was simply the sound of night itself, an unchanging backdrop to their lives. Having spent the night steeped in the profound quiet of a pre-electrical world, you emerge into the dawn, not to the cacophony of a modern city, but to the distinct earthy hum of the rural symphony. Life in the countryside, before the advent of widespread mechanization, had its own unique auditory landscape, one shaped by nature, animals, and the unhurried rhythms of human labor. Imagine stepping out onto the dewy grass. The first sound that genuinely registers is likely the chorus of birds. Not just a few chirps, but a vibrant, overlapping tapestry of calls, whistles, and songs from countless species. Without the constant drone of human technology, their voices would fill the air with startling clarity. Defining the early morning, you'd hear the insistent caw of a crow, the cheerful trill of a robin, and the gentle cooing of doves, each sound distinct and unmasked. As the sun begins to warm the land, the sounds of farm animals become more pronounced. The rhythmic lowing of cows as they are led to pasture, the impatient bleating of sheep in their pens, and the insistent clucking and cackling of chickens scratching in the dirt. You'd hear the distant neigh of a horse, perhaps followed by the creak of a harness as it's hitched to a plow. These aren't just background noises, they are integral to the soundscape, vital indicators of the life and work around you. The wind itself plays a much more prominent role. You'd hear its constant whisper through the leaves of trees, the soft rustle of tall grasses in the fields, or the more insistent sigh as it sweeps over open land. A strong gust might bring the clatter of branches or the distinct groan of an old oak tree. Water, too, contributes to the symphony, the gentle gurgle of a nearby stream, the steady drip from a roof after a rain shower, or the distant, soothing rush of a larger river. These natural elements are not drowned out. They are the primary architects of the ambient sound. Consider the sounds of manual labor. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of an axe splitting firewood, each strike echoing crisply in the still air. The steady swish, swish of a broom made of natural bristles against a stone floor. The soft clatter of a wooden bucket against the side of a well as water is drawn up, followed by the splash as it hits the surface. When a carpenter is at work, you'd hear the rhythmic sawing of wood, the sharp rap of a hammer, and the scrape of a plane. Every action, powered by human muscle, creates its own distinct, unamplified sound. One common historical fact is that rural populations were largely self-sufficient, producing most of what they needed. What's less commonly considered is how this intense self-reliance impacted the soundscape. You would be intimately familiar with the sounds of your own work and the work of your neighbors. The distant clink of a shepherd's crook against a stone, the rhythmic thud of grain being threshed, or the soft whirring of a spinning wheel from a nearby cottage window. These were all indicators of productivity, of community, of life happening in real time around you. Another fascinating detail of this rural soundscape is the way sounds were used for communication over distances. Without telephones or loudspeakers, a well-placed shout or call could carry surprisingly far. Farmers might call to each other across fields. Shepherds might use specific calls to direct their dogs, and villagers might use shouts to alert others to a fire or an intruder. Even the distinctive sound of a church bell, its toll carrying across miles, served as a primary timekeeper and a signal for community gatherings or emergencies. These sounds were functional, vital tools for social cohesion and safety. Historians still debate whether the constant exposure to the nuanced sounds of nature and human labor in rural pre-industrial environments fostered a different kind of auditory processing, potentially enhancing observational skills, or if our modern environment has simply dulled our sensitivity to subtle auditory cues. It's a fascinating question about how our sensory input shapes our cognitive abilities. As the day progresses, the sounds shift with the activities. The murmur of conversation from people gathered in the village square, the laughter of children playing simple, unamplified games, the occasional song hummed or sung by someone working in the fields. Even the cooking fires contribute, with the steady sizzle of fat and the gentle bubble of a stew. These are the sounds of community, of life lived largely outdoors, intimately connected to the cycles of nature. As evening approaches, the rural symphony begins to wind down. The animals settle, the tools are put away, and the human voices soften. The chorus of crickets and cicadas grows louder, signaling the return of the deep quiet of the night. You've lived through another day where every sound had meaning, where the absence of artificial noise allowed the world to speak to you in its purest, most organic form. From the gentle hum of the rural landscape, let's now transport ourselves to the heart of human habitation, before electricity, the urban echoes of a pre-industrial city. You might imagine these places to be chaotic, but compared to our modern metropolises, they were filled with a unique, surprisingly organic auditory landscape, a world defined by the sounds of human and animal effort rather than machine. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow, winding streets of London in the 18th century, or perhaps a bustling market town in Renaissance Italy. There's no constant drone of cars, no distant rumble of trains, no ubiquitous background hum of air conditioning units. Instead, your ears are met with a symphony of human-powered activity. The rhythmic clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones is a dominant sound, accompanied by the creak of wooden cartwheels and the jingle of harness bells. Every delivery, every passenger, every journey is announced by these distinct, organic sounds. The human voice, unamplified, takes on a different kind of prominence. Street vendors loudly hawk their wares, their cries a familiar soundtrack to daily life. Fresh fish, get your fresh fish, or newspapers read all about it. The babble of 1,000 conversations, the laughter of children playing simple games in the alleys, the occasional shout of a tradesman calling out to an apprentice. These are the sounds of human interaction, vibrant and immediate, yet lacking the piercing quality of modern amplified noise. As you pass by workshops, you hear the unmistakable sounds of skilled labor, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer striking metal, sending sparks and sound echoing down the street, the steady tap, tap, tap of a shoemaker's hammer as he fastens soles to leather, the insistent sawing and planing of wood from a carpenter's shop, the soft whir of a spinning wheel from an open window, or the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a loom. These are the sounds of industry, but an industry powered by human muscle, simple tools and rudimentary mechanical advantage, not by unseen electrical currents. One common historical fact is that pre-industrial cities were often incredibly dense, with people living and working in very close proximity. What's less commonly considered is how this density, combined with the lack of mechanical noise, amplified the sounds of human life. You would be constantly aware of your neighbors' activities, their conversations, and their movements. Privacy, in an auditory sense, was a rare luxury, forcing people to develop subtle forms of communication and awareness of their sonic footprint. The sounds of water and waste management, though perhaps less romantic, were also prominent. The splash of water being drawn from a public well, the gurgle of primitive drainage systems, or the calls of gardilou from the French garde à l'eau, or watch out for the water before someone emptied a chamber pot out a window. These were distinct and often unavoidable parts of the urban soundscape. You might also hear the calls of night soil collectors, their presence a vital, if unpleasant, part of city hygiene. Even at night, when the sounds of daily commerce diminished, the city wasn't entirely silent. The distant calls of night watchmen, their voices echoing down quiet streets as they announced the hour and the state of the city. All's well might provided a rhythmic comfort and sense of security. The occasional bark of a dog, the scurrying of rats in the sewers, or the soft sounds of people moving within their homes would fill the gaps left by the daytime bustle. Historians still debate whether the constant exposure to dense, localized human and animal sounds in pre-industrial cities led to a different kind of sensory filtering in the brain, allowing people to discern individual sounds in a crowded environment more effectively, or if modern urban noise has simply desensitized our auditory processing. This fascinating question probes the adaptive capabilities of human hearing in vastly different soundscapes. The sounds of religion and public announcements also formed a core part of the urban auditory experience. The pealing of church bells, marking the hours or calling the faithful to worship, resonated throughout the city, serving as a primary timekeeper for everyone. Town criers, with their distinctive bells and booming voices, would gather crowds to deliver official news, proclamations, or important warnings. These were the loudspeakers of their age, vital for disseminating information in a world without mass media. The sensory world of a pre-industrial city was rich, dynamic, and deeply human. It was a place where every sound had meaning, where proximity bred auditory awareness, and where the lack of electricity meant that life's rhythm was dictated by the organic pulses of human and animal activity. To our modern ears, it might initially feel unnervingly quiet. But then, perhaps a profound and intricate symphony would reveal itself. Having explored the distinct sounds of both rural and urban pre-electrical landscapes, let's now consider a universal constant in that quiet world: the sounds generated by human-powered labor itself. Before the widespread adoption of engines and electric motors, nearly every task, from the simplest chore to the most complex industry, created its own unique symphony of non-mechanized effort. These were the rhythms of life, built on muscle, ingenuity, and simple tools. Imagine yourself in a bustling workshop. The blacksmith's forge is alive with sound, the roaring whoosh of the bellows as air is pumped into the coals, making them glow with intense heat. Then, the rhythmic clang, clang, clang of the hammer, striking hot iron on the anvil, each blow shaping the metal, sending reverberations through the very ground beneath your feet. This isn't a continuous, monotonous hum, but a powerful, percussive rhythm, punctuated by the sizzling hiss of the metal being plunged into water for tempering. The sounds tell a story of immense effort and skilled craftsmanship. Move to a construction site, and the sounds are equally distinct. The rhythmic thud of axes as timber is felled and shaped, the groan and creak of ropes and pulleys as heavy stones or logs are lifted into place, the steady tap, tap, tap of a mason's hammer against stone, carefully shaping blocks, the scraping sound of shovels moving earth, the splash of water as mortar is mixed by hand, every beam lifted, every stone laid, every nail hammered is accompanied by the sounds of human muscle and simple, unamplified tools. There are no power drills, no jackhammers, just the raw sounds of physical work. In a textile workshop or even a home, you'd hear the persistent, almost hypnotic whir of a spinning wheel as fibers are twisted into thread. The rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a loom, its shuttles flying back and forth, weaving patterns into fabric. These sounds speak of patience, repetition, and intricate skill, a constant low-level buzz of productive effort. Compare that to the drone of a modern factory, and you realize the profound difference in scale and sonic texture. One common historical fact is that watermills and windmills were crucial sources of power for grinding grain, sawing wood, and performing other industrial tasks. What's less commonly considered is how these large, rudimentary machines contributed their own unique and often surprisingly loud sounds to the landscape. A watermill would have a constant, deep rumble from its turning gears and the powerful rush and splash of water over its wheel. A windmill would generate a low groan as its massive wooden sails turned in the wind, accompanied by the creak of its internal mechanisms. These were powerful, if intermittent, mechanical sounds in a largely organic world. Even the most mundane household chores generated their own specific sounds. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a mortar and pestle as spices or grains are ground, the gentle swish of a hand broom on a packed dirt or stone floor, the rhythmic scrubbing sound of laundry being hand-washed against a washboard or stones, the soft clip-clop of scissors as cloth is cut, or the quiet snip of thread. These are intimate, repetitive sounds that underscore the manual nature of daily existence. Think about the sound of transportation, the rhythmic clop, clop, clop of horse hooves on unpaved roads, sometimes accompanied by the jingle of harness bells, the creak and groan of wooden wheels on carts or wagons, each bump and rut in the road creating its own protest. The distant shouts of drivers urging their animals on, or the specific calls of a stagecoach horn announcing its arrival. These sounds were the primary indicators of movement and travel, distinct and easily identifiable from afar. There were no hidden engines. The source of every sound was visible and tangible. Historians still debate whether the constant exposure to the precise, rhythmic, and distinct sounds of human-powered labor fostered a different understanding of causality and effort in pre-industrial individuals, or if our modern ears, accustomed to amorphous mechanical noise, have lost the ability to discern the subtle acoustic signatures of human work. It's a fascinating question about how our sonic environment might shape our very perception of cause and effect. The human voice, too, played a key role in the symphony of labor. Workers would often sing work songs, their voices rising and falling in rhythm with their tasks hauling ropes, rowing boats, or tilling fields. These songs weren't just for entertainment. They served a practical purpose, coordinating effort, maintaining morale, and passing the time. The unamplified voices, blending with the sounds of their labor, created a unique auditory tapestry that spoke of community and shared effort. This reliance on human and animal power meant that the sounds of effort were omnipresent, yet varied. They weren't the homogeneous, pervasive hum of electricity. They were distinct, localized, and often deeply resonant. Every creak, every clang, every swish was a direct result of energy exerted, a clear, audible signal of life being actively lived and built. It was a world where sound was inextricably linked to physical action, a constant reminder of the tangible effort required to shape existence. Having immersed yourself in the distinct sounds of human-powered labor, from the blacksmith's clang to the loom's clack, let's now consider the most fundamental and omnipresent sounds of the pre-electrical world, nature's unfiltered voice. Before the roar of engines and the constant hum of electricity, the natural world dictated the ambient soundscape, its rhythms and phenomena shaping human experience in profound ways. Imagine yourself standing in an open field, far from any settlement. The air is alive with the subtle, intricate sounds of the natural world. The gentle whisper of the wind through tall grasses and the rustle of leaves in the forest are not background noises, they are the dominant sounds, carrying information about changes in weather or the presence of unseen animals. You'd hear the distinctive buzz of insects, the drone of bees around wildflowers, the insistent chirping of crickets on a summer evening, or the high-pitched hum of mosquitoes. These tiny sounds, often lost in our modern environments, would be a constant, noticeable presence. The sounds of water would be particularly prominent and varied. The gentle gurgle of a small stream, the steady rush of a river, the rhythmic lapping of waves on a lakeshore, or the distant, thunderous roar of a powerful waterfall. You'd hear the distinct pat, pat, pat of raindrops on leaves, turning into a steady drumming on a thatched roof during a downpour, the splash of a fish jumping in a quiet pond, or the gentle ripple of a duck moving through reeds. These are all clear, distinct sounds that define the auditory landscape. Animal life, too, contributed immensely to this natural symphony. Beyond the farm animals, you'd hear the calls of wildlife, the hoot of an owl echoing through the nighttime woods, the sharp cry of a hawk circling overhead, the distant howl of wolves in wilder regions, or the chattering of squirrels in the trees. These sounds were not just pleasant, they were vital, communicating information about the environment, signaling danger, or simply providing the backdrop to human existence. Your ears, finely tuned, would instinctively interpret these myriad animal sounds, recognizing patterns and meanings. One common historical fact is that people in pre-industrial societies were deeply connected to the natural world, their lives dictated by its cycles. What's less commonly discussed is how this deep connection was reinforced through their auditory experiences. The changing seasons had distinct sound signatures: the gentle chirp of newly hatched birds in spring, the buzzing crescendo of cicadas in the heat of summer, the rustle of dry leaves in autumn winds, and the muffled silence of a world blanketed by winter snow. These seasonal sounds were a constant, immersive reminder of nature's rhythms. Consider the dramatic sounds of weather phenomena: the distant low rumble of a gathering thunderstorm, growing louder and more insistent, culminating in the sharp crack and booming reverberations of thunder that shook the very ground. The sudden whoosh of a strong wind gust, preceding a downpour, the howling of a blizzard, the scraping of ice, or the crunch of snow underfoot. These were not just meteorological events. They were powerful, immersive sound experiences that commanded attention and often forced significant changes in daily activity. A fascinating yet often overlooked detail is how the lack of light pollution amplified the auditory experience of the night sky. While not directly a sound source, the vast, inky darkness of a pre-electrical night meant that when meteors streaked across the sky, or if a rare bolide, a very bright meteor exploded in the atmosphere, the accompanying sonic boom or crackle would be far more pronounced and startling. These fleeting, powerful natural sounds would have been truly awe-inspiring, reinforcing the immense power of the universe in a way that modern light and noise pollution often obscures. Historians still debate whether the constant immersion in natural soundscapes fostered a deeper spiritual or philosophical connection to nature among pre-industrial people, or if our modern noise has merely desensitized us to the profound beauty and information contained within natural auditory environments. It's a rich area for contemplation on how our sensory world shapes our consciousness. The very quality of silence itself was different. It wasn't the dead, almost artificial silence of a soundproofed room. It was a living, breathing quiet, filled with the subtle hum of the earth and the distant, organic sounds of life. This ambient quiet allowed for introspection, for listening to one's own thoughts, and for an unfiltered connection to the rhythms of the planet. As the day turns into night, the natural symphony shifts again. The diurnal sounds recede, replaced by the persistent chirping of crickets, the calls of nocturnal birds and animals, and the soft, steady breathing of the wind. Nature's unfiltered voice remains, a constant companion, shaping the very fabric of existence in a world yet to be dominated by the sounds of human technology. Your ears, unburdened by modern cacophony, were deeply attuned to this constant, organic conversation. Having explored the omnipresent symphony of nature's unfiltered voice, let's now consider how information moved in a world devoid of instant electronic communication. In this pre-electrical era, communications challenge was met through ingenious, often surprisingly effective, reliance on the human voice, natural signals, and simple mechanical means, creating an auditory landscape vastly different from our own. Imagine you need to convey news or a message across a village, or even to a nearby town. There's no smartphone in your pocket, no internet, no radio. Instead, you might rely on the town crier. He's a familiar figure, often equipped with a loud voice and a bell. His rhythmic clang, clang, clang would cut through the ambient quiet of the village square, drawing people from their homes. Then his unamplified voice would boom out the latest news: a royal decree, an upcoming market day, a local birth or death, or perhaps a warning about a wandering rogue. His words, though limited in reach, were the primary source of public information, meticulously listened to by an attentive audience. Beyond formal announcements, everyday communication over distance relied heavily on the human voice's ability to carry in the absence of noise pollution. A shout across a field, calling a child in for supper, or a distinctive cry between shepherds guiding their flocks would travel remarkably far. People developed powerful voices and learned to project them effectively. This natural amplification meant that even a strong voice could serve as a rudimentary long-distance communication tool, a skill largely lost in our noisy world. Consider the role of church bells. Their pealing wasn't just for calling people to worship. Different patterns of ringing conveyed specific messages: a slow, mournful toll for a death, a rapid peal for a fire or an invasion, or a joyful chime for a wedding or a festival. These were the earliest forms of mass communication, their sounds carrying for miles across the quiet countryside, understood by everyone in the community. The specific cadence and volume communicated urgency and meaning in a way that modern alerts rarely achieve. Animals, particularly dogs and horses, also played a role in communication. The persistent bark of a dog could alert a village to an approaching stranger or a wild animal. The distinctive sound of a horse galloping down a road, or the jingle of its harness bells, would announce the arrival of a traveler long before they were seen. These natural sounds were interpreted, providing auditory cues about the world beyond the immediate vicinity. One common historical fact is the slowness of communication before the telegraph. What's less commonly considered is how this slowness, combined with the quiet environment, affected the quality of information. News often traveled by word of mouth, meaning it was repeated, embellished, and sometimes distorted. Yet, because people's ears were more attuned, they might have paid more attention to subtle vocal cues and inflections, perhaps discerning truth from rumor more acutely in the absence of overwhelming information. Think about the sound signals used in navigation or warning. Ships at sea would use foghorns, initially natural horns or gongs, later steam-powered, whose low booming calls would echo across the water, warning other vessels in dense fog. Lighthouses, while primarily visual, sometimes incorporated bells or cannons to guide sailors through treacherous waters. These powerful, unamplified sounds were critical for safety in a world where visibility could drop to zero. A fascinating, yet often overlooked detail is the use of ear trumpets, or listening horns, for the hard of hearing, and sometimes even for amplifying distant sounds. These rudimentary devices, long before electronic hearing aids, demonstrate how people adapted to the limitations of their natural hearing in a quiet world. While seemingly primitive, they highlight a nuanced understanding of acoustics and the human need to extend auditory reach. Historians still debate whether the reliance on unamplified auditory communication in pre-electrical societies fostered a stronger sense of local community cohesion and shared understanding, or if it also contributed to greater isolation between communities due to the inherent limitations of sound travel. This academic discussion delves into the social implications of different communication technologies. Even in personal communication, the quiet made a difference. Conversations were rarely shouted over background noise. You learned to speak in a more modulated tone, to listen intently, and to rely on the nuances of pauses and inflections. Secrets were genuinely whispered, not just spoken quietly into a noisy room. The act of listening was paramount, a vital skill in a world where information was precious and often delivered through subtle auditory cues. The challenge of communication in a quiet world fostered ingenuity and a profound reliance on basic human capabilities. It created an auditory environment where every sound had the potential to carry meaning, where the human voice was a powerful instrument, and where shared understanding was often built on the clarity of unamplified sound and the attentiveness of the listener. Having considered the challenges and ingenuity of communication in a pre-electrical world, let's now turn to something that speaks directly to the human spirit: music and storytelling. In a world without loudspeakers, without recording devices, without amplification of any kind, entertainment was deeply personal, intimate, and profoundly unamplified, creating an auditory experience unlike anything we know today. Imagine an evening in a cozy common room, perhaps in a country inn or a private home. There's no television, no radio, no streaming music. Entertainment comes from the human voice, from shared experience, and from simple acoustic instruments. The sound of a lute or a harp, their plucked strings producing delicate, resonant tones, would fill the room without overwhelming it. A flute or a penny whistle might weave a melodic line, its sound clear and bright. These instruments, crafted from wood, gut, or simple metals, produce sounds that are inherently warm, organic, and designed to resonate naturally within enclosed spaces. The human voice, in particular, was the primary vehicle for entertainment. You'd gather around a storyteller, his voice rising and falling with the drama of his tale, his inflections, his pauses, His sudden changes in tone would be acutely audible, like drawing everyone into the narrative. The nuances of his performance would be fully appreciated because there was no competing noise, no distant traffic, no buzzing appliances. Every word, every breath, contributed to the immersive experience. This fostered a different kind of listening, a more active and engaged form of reception. Consider the role of singing. People would sing folk songs, ballads, hymns, or work songs, often in unison or in simple harmonies. These weren't professional performances in grand concert halls, they were communal acts, performed in homes, around campfires, or in village gatherings. The unamplified voices, blending together, created a rich human sound, full of natural resonance. You'd hear every voice distinctly, every slight imperfection, every unique timbre. There was a raw authenticity to the sound, a direct connection to the human throat and lungs, unmediated by technology. One common historical fact is that storytelling was a primary form of entertainment and knowledge transfer in oral cultures. What's less commonly discussed is how the prevailing quiet intensified the experience of being told a story. In the absence of distractions, the audience's attention was singularly focused on the storyteller's voice. This meant that subtle vocal cues, changes in rhythm, or even prolonged silences could be used with great dramatic effect, creating a truly immersive and intimate narrative experience. Think about the atmosphere in a small local pub or tavern. The clink of ceramic mugs, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. Then someone might bring out a fiddle or a bodhran, an Irish drum, and the room would fill with lively, unamplified music. People would tap their feet, clap their hands, or even join in with spontaneous singing. The sounds are immediate, vibrant, and interactive, lacking the artificial separation often created by amplified music in modern venues. Another fascinating detail of this unamplified world is the sheer variety of simple, homemade instruments. Beyond the common ones, you might encounter instruments made from gourds, animal bones, stretched skins, or carved wood, each producing its own unique range of sounds. From the percussive click of castanets to the mellow toot of a bone flute, these instruments demonstrate an incredible ingenuity in creating sound from natural materials, all designed to be heard within the quiet acoustic spaces of their time. Historians still debate whether the reliance on unamplified music and storytelling in pre-electrical societies led to a deeper appreciation for the nuances of human vocal expression and instrumental timbre, or if modern amplification has simply allowed for a wider range of sonic experiences that were previously impossible. This academic discussion delves into how technology shapes our aesthetic preferences and auditory perceptions. Even formal musical performances, like those in a church or a small chamber, were entirely acoustic. The soaring voices of a choir, the majestic tones of an organ powered by bellows, a human-powered machine in itself, creating its own deep whoosh and drone, or the intricate interplay of a string quartet. These sounds would fill the space with a natural, unforced resonance. Every note, every harmony, would be purely organic, experienced directly, without the distortion or enhancement of electronic amplification. In this quiet world, the act of creating and experiencing music and stories was a deeply personal, communal, and often interactive affair. It relied entirely on the natural capabilities of the human voice and the acoustic properties of instruments and spaces. There was an intimacy, a directness to the sound, that is largely absent in our electronically amplified lives. It was a world where quiet allowed beauty to truly resonate, where every note and every word was a precious, unamplified gift. We've journeyed through the profound quiet of a world before electricity, from the hushed dawns to the deeply silent nights, through the organic symphonies of rural life, the intimate echoes of pre-industrial cities, and the unamplified beauty of human-powered labor, music, and storytelling. Now, as our exploration concludes, let's consider how dramatically our modern world contrasts with that historical quiet, and reflect on the concept of sensory overload then versus now. Imagine the transition, the slow creep of the Industrial Revolution, then the rapid explosion of the electrical age. Suddenly, the world began to fill with new sounds, the distant chug of steam engines, the metallic roar of early factories, the clatter of trains on steel tracks. These were entirely new auditory experiences, powerful and persistent, beginning to erode the natural quiet that had dominated for millennia. Then came the age of electricity. The gentle flicker of candlelight was replaced by the bright, constant glow of incandescent bulbs, bringing with it the faint, almost imperceptible hum of electrical current. The silence of the night was shattered by the distant thrum of power lines, the whir of motors in newly electrified homes and businesses. The world, quite literally, became louder. Today, you wake up to a world saturated with sound, the blare of an alarm clock, the hum of your refrigerator, the whir of your computer, the distant rumble of traffic, the constant chatter of news on a television or radio. As you step outside, the roar of cars, the distant drone of airplanes, the buzz of streetlights, the cacophony of 1,000 different devices competing for your attention. Your ears are constantly bombarded by a level of noise that would have been utterly overwhelming. Indeed, profoundly disturbing to someone from a pre-electrical era. This isn't just about volume, it's about the quality of the sound. The sounds of our modern world are often mechanistic, continuous, and synthetic. They lack the organic, varied, and often rhythmic nature of pre-industrial sounds. The gentle splash of a hand drawing water has been replaced by the whoosh of a faucet. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith is now the amorphous roar of an industrial plant. The unamplified human voice competes with loudspeakers, sirens, and the constant digital ping of notifications. One common historical fact is that noise pollution, as a recognized problem, is a relatively recent phenomenon, largely a product of industrialization and electrification. What's less commonly discussed is the subtle, physiological impact this constant barrage of noise has had on human hearing and cognition. Our brains have become remarkably adept at filtering out much of this background noise, effectively dulling our sensitivity to subtle auditory cues that were once vital for survival and environmental awareness. Think about the difference in how you perceive silence. For us, true silence, the complete absence of sound, is rare and often achieved only in specially constructed environments or remote wilderness. For someone from the pre-electrical world, silence was a frequent companion, a natural state that allowed for heightened awareness of subtle sounds and inner thoughts. We actively seek out white noise or ambient sounds to help us sleep, perhaps unconsciously trying to recreate the constant, soft presence that nature once provided. Historians still debate whether the shift from a predominantly quiet, natural soundscape to a noisy, industrialized one has fundamentally altered human neurological development and sensory processing, leading to a different way of experiencing and interpreting the world, or if humans simply adapt effortlessly to new auditory environments without long-term cognitive shifts. This academic discussion probes the deep, long-term impacts of our technological evolution on our very being. The pervasive quiet of the past fostered a different kind of human connection. Conversations were more intimate, voices more carefully modulated, listening was a more active, crucial skill. Music and storytelling were deeply personal and communal, shared directly from human voice to human ear, without the mediation of amplification. Today, we consume vast amounts of information and entertainment, but often in a fragmented, louder, and less personal way. Ultimately, understanding how disturbingly quiet the world was before electricity isn't just a historical curiosity. It's an invitation to reflect on our own modern existence. It encourages us to consider what we've gained: speed, convenience, global connectivity, but also what we might have lost: a profound connection to the natural world, a heightened awareness of subtle sounds, and perhaps a deeper capacity for quiet introspection. Your journey through that forgotten quiet reminds us that silence, once dominant, is now a precious commodity. Now, as the last echoes of the quiet past gently fade, allow your mind to drift away from the sounds, or lack thereof, that have filled our story tonight. Let the abstract hum of modernity, the distant whispers of our busy world, soften and become a soothing backdrop. Imagine yourself settling into a comfortable space, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of your own quiet moment. The comparisons, the reflections, they all become less distinct, melting into a gentle awareness of the present. Feel the quietness around you now, a deliberate, chosen stillness in your own unique space. Breathe deeply, let go of any lingering thoughts, and allow your body and mind to ease into a tranquil, restful state. The world, in all its sounds and silences, waits for tomorrow.